I remember being at the HMV in Oshawa Center, and I saw this record by a band called Superchunk called Come Pick Me Up, and it had a really cool cover. And I remember just this song called Hello Hawk came on, which is the second song on the record, and it had this amazing string arrangement at the end, and I was like, this is amazing music. And I was like kind of listening to punk rock and a bunch of other crap at the time, and like not good punk rock. But like I was listening to this stuff and I heard this music and I was like, oh my God, what is this? Bought the record based on the album cover alone and this little string section, and then went home and obsessed over it, and then I read all the liner notes and who played what, and that Jim O'Rourke had produced it, and then I got into Jim O'Rourke, and that opened up experimental music and all of these things to me.
Welcome to This Broken Mixtape, the podcast that rewinds and presses play on the soundtrack to your life. I'm Jeff Wu.
And I'm Justin Lee.
Ontario's singer-songwriter Jonas Bonnetta is best known for his indie folk pop project, Evening Hymns. More recently, he released the Ambient album, All This Here, under his own name, which started off as a score to a documentary film about an inn on Newfoundland's Fogo Island. We talked to Jonas about his creative process in making the new album, how Jim O'Rourke's production inspired his own love for ambient music, and how performing songs about his late father led to physical and emotional exhaustion.
We're here with our special guest, singer-songwriter Jonas Bonnetta. Thanks for being on the show, Jonas.
Thanks for having me.
So, just full disclosure, we're doing this interview in a van, Jonas's touring van, and because we didn't have a sort of quiet space in the Drake Hotel where he's playing tonight, so apologies for any street noise that you might hear, but so far it's pretty good.
This van, actually, a funny little Canadian music story that we went to, we booked a van through Expedia, and we got to the Europe car in Ottawa on Cumberland Street, and they didn't have a van for us, even though we booked a van. So Mika, who plays violin in this project, went to the Hertz rental car that was right beside the Europe car, and they had a van, but they didn't have it clean, and it had just been returned from Alanis Morissette.
Oh, wow.
So we had to wait to get this van. Well, we didn't, Alanis left it in really great shape, so they didn't have to clean it. We just kind of took it and went. And Expedia refunded me the difference, so all's fair, other than don't use Europe car on Cumberland Street in Ottawa if you want a van.
How did you guys know that? Like, they
told
us,
yeah. Which was like, I was kind of like, I don't think that they should tell us that,
yeah,
you know? It feels like it's like some type of...
It's very unprofessional.
Privacy issue.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to talk about this new record. You're recording under your actual name this time. For the past decade, you've been recording under Evening Hymns. And this time around, you're recording under Jonas Bonnetta. This is more of an ambient record, instrumental record for you. I'm wondering, what was the decision to record it under your full name? Obviously, it's a sort of a different project than Evening Hymns, which for our listeners who might not know, is more of a folk singer-songwriter material. Tell us why you decided on this choice.
Sure. So this record started off kind of as a film score for a documentary called Strange and Familiar, which is, we can talk about it, but it's a documentary about architecture and people of Fogo Island, which is a small island off the coast of Newfoundland. And, I got asked to score this film, and when the film was done and it started to travel around, I went to New York City for the premiere and met the folks that ran the inn, and Zita, the lady that kind of like was the brains and money behind this big project that was taking place on the island. And I'll get to that at some point. But, and then I went out there with the soundtrack and made this thing, and then realized that like it wasn't an Evening Hymns record, and that I really wanted it to be treated not like an Evening Hymns record. So I really wanted maybe people that were familiar with the Evening Hymns to approach it in a new way, and also people that weren't familiar with it I was just kind of worried about cross-pollination in a way. And in retrospect, I mean, the projects are really similar in so many ways, because I've always incorporated field recordings into the Evening Hymns records, and my melodic choices aren't entirely different. So I think it was just like a way of starting to like branch out with my score work and my, my longer form ambient slow moving stuff, and moving away from Evening Hymns so that Evening Hymns can be potentially like more pop oriented, or like folk pop, or like, throwbacky, whatever it is. And that there's these two kind of avenues to go down. So I really wanted it to be two separate projects, more or less for kind of compartmentalizing my own brain. So.
You mentioned the documentary. So this actually does appear as the score for that documentary?
Yeah, the doc. I mean, I was given a few different cuts of the film, and I actually, I made so much music for this film, and they used a bunch of it, but not all of it. And so I kind of like, when the film came out and I got invited to go to Fogo to work, I kind of brought all my hard drives out there and listened to everything I'd created. So it wasn't all the pieces that are in the film, I think, are on this record. But all the pieces on the record are definitely not. I mean, it's definitely not in the film. There's a bunch of stuff that didn't make the cut for the film for one reason or another, editing purposes and tone and vibe and stuff. And then there's a bunch of pieces I wrote on Fogo Island that were specifically written, completely detached from the film, but on that landscape. So maybe even more so connected with that place.
Okay. In terms of just sort of the reference points, was there a specific album or artist that you were kind of looking to sort of have a similar feel, or just as like a general starting point?
Well, starting point for me, like the film for me, I was watching, when I was scoring the film, I was watching the film and scoring a picture. So okay. A lot of water, a lot of ocean. It made a lot of sense to me what I think like the direction I had to go in right away, which I wanted it to be kind of glacial and, slow moving and droney, and I love making that kind of music. So it made a lot of sense. And then the music that was made on the island all started from field recordings. So making field recordings, wandering around the island, processing those using Max MSP, improvising, which is like a software you can use to kind of like, abstract audio, or not abstract it, but I use it to abstract audio. And then from there, improvising with grand piano and arranging strings over those kind of experimental moments. And then having violin and cello play those string arrangements, and then mixing it all together, and then processing some of that with Max MSP, and then improvising with that a little bit more, just kind of like, it's very collagey. So it wasn't, the landscape certainly was the number one influence for the record, 100%. And musically, I mean, I could list off a long list of things that I listen to that like I consider somewhat similar to this project, but there wasn't anything that I was trying to emulate other than potentially the landscape. I guess I was like, wanted to kind of make this sonic portrait of Fogo Island and the area kind of around it. So,
and I know you incorporated a lot of Newfoundland fiddle music in this. Obviously, it's a score for that environment, but what were some of the reasons behind that?
Well, it wasn't Newfoundland fiddle music really, but it was like wanting to make sure that when I wrote violin stuff, that it all felt more akin to the East Coast and fiddle than like some type of like, classical chamber violin. I wasn't looking to do this big lush thing. I wanted all the violins to kind of like seesaw and, be more akin to the way that music is as a reference point to that place. So that I wasn't just being like, this is the way I want to do a score. It was like thinking a lot about what music is there. And the film's called Strange and Familiar, and I think this is kind of a really, Todd Saunders, the architect that the documentary is partially on, who designed these buildings on Fogo Island. He talks about things being strange, these buildings that he makes, because they're contemporary and they're abstract and they're strange, yet they're still familiar because he's incorporating all of these like parts of Fogo's vernacular architecture. And so I wanted to do the same thing that I really wanted to write with strings, because it's something that I love to do, but I wanted to make sure that those strings were still like, referential to Fogo Island and not just like my own thing bulldozing through whatever. So yeah, Mika Posen, who plays violin on the record, her dad is an ethnomusicologist, and he had, or something along those lines, I'm not sure if that's a specific title, but he had this kind of big collection of like, East Coast music. And so while we recorded a bunch of the stuff in the living room of her parents' house, and we're like kind of like pulling out these records and being like, whoa, like this is from Fogo Island or near Fogo. And it's like these, and so that was kind of like a funny, like the day of recording, being like, whoa, okay, cool. There's a reason why this is all happening in this space, and trying to make sense. Did I study like East Coast fiddle? Or absolutely not. I just like, this is my kind of like probably ignorant interpretation, but just wanting all those violins to, seesaw and kind of be a little woozy, I think, to feel like the tracks were always on the ocean, kind of heaving and bobbing with the waves. So
okay, and this is more like of an abstract process, and very different than evening hymns. I'm wondering, is it in many ways more difficult, this approach to composing this type of music versus just sort of your singer-songwriter stuff?
I have less ego attached to this, so this is much more enjoyable for me in so many ways. I mean, I'm working on a new Evening Hymns record right now, and this is teaching me a lot of stuff about that. And it's nice to be able to like go and be more experimental in this world and focus more on songwriting in that world. Although these are songs, and I think that I'm thinking structure-wise as much in this project as I am in the Evening Hymns project. But yeah, I wouldn't say that one is harder than the other. I'm definitely like more interested in making this music right now. You know, I think that there's something that's kind of calling me to be creating this stuff right now, so that feels great. Although I'm like really excited about the Evening Hymns record and the way that it's going, and I think having these two projects, and you know, I'm really hoping I can make a life for this solo. I mean, it's not a solo project. It's turned into a band affair, this thing tonight, but and this record and like recreating it. But I've just made a second record of ambient music in Big Sur, California, that we made in January. Me and a violinist named Edwin Huizinga, who's playing with me tonight. But and we did the same thing. It's like, you know, field recordings, processed, improvised over that with piano and violin and strings and a bunch of other things. And it seems like right now I really get to like engage with my love for making field recordings and being out in the natural world, like trying to interpret it and think about it, engage with it, and that feels like the timing's really right for that. And it's allowing me in the Evening Hymns world to just kind of like think more about what that project is and have a lot of fun making those songs, because it's like just putting on entirely different hats. Whereas Evening Hymns used to have a lot of field recording, droney stuff happening in it as well. I think the next record might be a little bit more straightforward. Who knows though?
Okay.
I love making this kind of stuff, and it's really easy at the end of a song to just like go into this world, a sound world. So.
One thing I was wondering about is in terms of visuals and lighting, it seems like it'd be a big part of a show just simply because it's ambient music, and, you know, I think it sort of conjures up specific images and a feel for it. So what can we expect tonight from the show in terms of those things? Yeah,
so I mean, obviously there's the film, so scoring to that was really amazing. It made me realize like how important that landscape is to the music. So, you know, we got some amazing funding through the Ontario Music Fund to go out to Newfoundland. And I took a filmmaker from Toronto named Colin Medley, who's a dear friend of mine, and we went out there for 5 days about a month ago, early April, I guess, and so almost 2 months ago. And we drove around for 5 days and just filmed all over the island. And so we've released a few music videos for the record, and everything's really slow moving and kind of abstracted because that's the imagery I wanted for this project. And then tonight we're projecting over an hour of footage like never seen before that we shot on the island, that's being projected over top of us. So just like really long cuts. And my hope is that, you know, people that are coming to the show tonight that haven't been there will get some type of sense of what it feels like to maybe be there. Because, you know, there's field recordings that I'm playing and manipulating, and then the music that was wrote for the film that was inspired directly by the place, and then all of this imagery that's sometimes abstracted, but for the most part these kind of static shots of different places around Fogo, and gives you an idea of what it's like to be there in early April. So
awesome.
It is crucial, and us as a band, every night we're realizing how important it is to have these visuals, and that we're, you know, sometimes we're just all sitting back and letting some of the drones kind of coast for a couple minutes and just like watching footage and like being like, oh man, and like playing off of that, not maybe tonally, but like certainly like pace wise, and just like letting things kind of unravel as they do. And we don't know. I mean, we don't know what we made it. We recorded our rehearsal and then sent it to the director, and he cut it to our rehearsal, and that hasn't changed. But every night, you know, give or take 2 or 3 minutes here and there on songs as we kind of improvise and things change. So images are locking up at different moments each night, which is really cool. And then also all of the field recordings I have on shuffle. So oftentimes some of the field recordings sync up and sometimes they don't, and we never know what we're going to get when I bring up the volume on the field recordings. And that's a way to keep us on our toes as well.
Right. Absolutely.
We're trying to make sure this never gets into this mode of like being too comfortable, so that we're always kind of on edge and like
you don't want to be on autopilot.
No, and there's a huge element of improvisation almost in every track here, where we've left room to kind of go somewhere, and we've been, you know, not trying to throw each other off, but trying to push each other a little bit. So it's been really super engaging for us on stage.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is the film available online if somebody wants to see it?
Yeah, I think you can buy it on like whatever, you know, I think on iTunes and stuff like that. I know the TVO broadcasts it every once in a while, so when they do, I think you can see it for free when it's in their broadcasting, when it's on their schedule kind of. And yeah, other than that, I'm not too sure. I haven't really looked into that because I haven't had to. So I think it's available like where you can get independent docs.
Sure.
I think it's available like on iTunes or something.
We'll look for it and post a link on our website.
That'd be amazing. Yeah, I can send you a link to it.
Okay.
It's a great, I should say, it's an amazing film. It's like a really it's a great snapshot of Fogo. It's a really inspiring story about Zita Cobb, the lady that is kind of the brains behind the whole project. It's an amazing portrait of Todd Saunders, who's an incredible architect from Gander. And then it's just like this beautiful portrait of the people of Fogo, who I've been there twice now, and they're just like the best. It's really kind of a special place to go. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, great.
So let's backtrack here. Your first sort of exposure to music, what was being played around the house? What kind of, and if you could be more specific to like specific albums and artists.
Okay. Well, I mean, my dad was a truck driver and my mom was a secretary. Mm-hmm. My dad played the spoons in the kitchen. That's about it. And, it wasn't really a super musical house by any means. My dad loved Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole. So we kind of grew up on a bunch of that stuff, and it's still really dear to my heart. Mm-hmm. But just the standards, like fairly obvious things. And then also like country music, it's like an era of country music I really like late 80s, early 90s country. Still have a soft spot for it. Actually, where I live, north of Kingston, there's a show at a Belleville called Sunday in the Country, and it's like this amazing show this Jeff guy runs, and all these folks call in and be like, I want to wish this person a happy birthday and dedicate this Alan Jackson song to someone. And we listen to it every Sunday at the house. It's like this really kind of charming thing. But yeah, I mean, it's like there wasn't anything that was like, I saw a Tom Petty music video when I was really young, and that was really cool to me. Mm-hmm. And then, I really got into Tom Petty, and that was the first concert I went to. And,
How old were you?
It was in 93 at Maple Leaf Gardens, so I would have been 12 years old. I think I was 30, maybe it was 94. It was when Wildflowers came out, which I think is late 93, early 94. And it was in May. My mom took me for my birthday. It was the first time I ever smelled weed. And
did you ask what that was?
No, it was bothering me, so I asked if I could move my seat. And in retrospect, it's like the nerdiest friggin'. I mean, I've always been, I've always been so sensitive to weed, and it was like funny because I remember like then just being like, oh man, I'm just a born nerd. But I still have my Tom Petty Wildflowers T-shirt from that show. Nice. That guy still, I was devastated last year when he passed away, and like. So yeah, that was as far as like getting obsessed about music, that was like the first time where I was like, bought the box set, had the T-shirts, and I kind of freaked out about somebody and idolized him and did till he died pretty much. And still a huge fan. We listened to Highway Companion on the way from Montreal yesterday. It was a great record. But yeah, as far as like that stuff, my older brother, I have a brother that's a couple years older than me. He kind of got into some cool stuff when he was like in his mid-teens kind of. So he put me onto like Kings of Convenience when Quiet as the New Loud came out, and like into Belle and Sebastian. I kind of got into the indie world, and this is like pre-internet for the most part, so you really had to kind of dig for stuff, and those things felt really special. We talk about that a lot in this van, about just trying to create things that are special and trying to like navigate this kind of horrible consumption culture that we live in now. But so that kind of got me into that stuff, and then I got into I remember being at the HMV in Oshawa Center, and I saw this record by a band called Superchunk called Come Pick Me Up, and it had a really cool cover. And it was back in the day when HMV would like let you take a CD and listen to it. They'd open it and let you listen to it at a listening post. They'd like carefully undo it, you pull it out, and you could like read through the little book. And I remember just this song called Hello Hawk came on, which is the second song on the record, and it had this amazing string arrangement at the end, and I was like, this is amazing music. And I was like kind of listening to punk rock and a bunch of other crap at the time, and like not good punk rock, but like I was listening to this stuff, and I heard this music, and I was like, oh my god, what is this? Bought the record based on the album cover alone, and this little string section, and then went home and obsessed over it, and then I read all the liner notes and who played what, and that Jim O'Rourke had produced it, and then I got into Jim O'Rourke, and that opened up experimental music and all of these things to me. And I'm still a huge Jimbo fan and still listen to his music. We listened to it yesterday. So that got me into like ambient stuff and drone stuff and like Music Concrete and all the stuff that he was doing in Drag City and Thrill Jockey and all of this stuff. And that was like, when I think of, if somebody asked me like, how come you do what you do? And like in the evening hymns world, is probably because of like Hayden or someone like that, like getting those records and learning how to play guitar when I was in high school. But when it comes to like my love for drone and ambient experimental music, it's definitely from buying Superchunk's record, Come Pick Me Up, learning about Jim O'Rourke production, becoming obsessed with Jim O'Rourke, and buying everything that he touched, produced, played on, yeah, and still a huge fan of both those artists, of Hayden and Jim O'Rourke. So yeah, those are moments for me that I specifically know, going to see Tom Petty's Wildflowers at Maple Leaf Gardens. Pete Droge opened, had to get moved because of the weed, get me stoned at like 12 or 13, and then Jim O'Rourke producing that Superchunk record. So
when your father or even mother played music for you, was it something that you automatically accepted, or was there certain artists that he played and you were just like, no, I'm not into this. Is this corny music or whatever? Because
I didn't really think about it.
Yeah. I feel like that initial reaction is like, you don't want to listen to what your parents play, but at the same time, I mean, later on as you get older, you start really appreciating it.
Well, I do. I mean, I love Nat King Cole and I love Frank Sinatra, and you know, my dad passed away 8 years ago, and it's like I go back to those things for like nostalgia purposes, but I mean, I found this Frank Sinatra record 2 years ago called Watertown that I'd never heard of before. That's from late 60s. I think 69 it came out. It's this amazing record. It's the only record that Frank never, that he sang as an overdub. He sang all of those records, like all those classic Frank Sinatra songs are him singing like live with an orchestra, which to me is like just mind-bending to know. Mm-hmm. So I, like a couple of years ago, I got really obsessed with Sinatra, and like a lot of it was a way to connect with my dad and make sense of like, you know, where my musical kind of like lineage comes from. And it's a weird one when it's Sinatra, but this record, Watertown, you should check it out. It's like this amazing kind of pop record. Frankie Valli worked on it, and it's a cool story. I mean, you could dedicate I could talk about it for the rest of this podcast, because it's like, man, it's a heavy record, and it's one of my favorites, and it's been reissued and you can get it. But the original pressing of it came with this huge poster, fold-out poster, and I have a copy of it. It's hanging up in my studio. And yeah, beautiful record. I mean, I wish my dad probably never knew about it, because it was like a really underappreciated Frank record, but it's badass. And I love Nat King Cole still. And I love old George Strait and Jones and, you know, all of that stuff, Dwight Yoakam and Alan Jackson, because it makes me just feel really comfortable. It makes me, I like to put it on when I'm cleaning my house, and just like makes me feel like I'm a kid again, and my folks are like, you know, tidying up around the house or like building something, or it's like comfort for me. So music's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things why we gravitate towards music, is like it's like comfort food, really. You know, when you have a meal that reminds you of a childhood meal that your mom used to cook.
Like spaghetti, man. It's like, for us, it's spaghetti. We always have spaghetti in our house, because it's just like, oh man, it's such comfort food.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about Evening Hymns, and specifically your record, Spectral Dust. At the time it came out, my own father had passed away a few years prior.
Yeah.
It was such an important record for me, because, you know, I think since I was probably 10 years old, music has had such a profound impact on me. And it's just natural that when you're feeling sad, you're going to go towards sad music. When you're feeling good, you're going to listen to like happy, perky music.
I like that quote from like High Fidelity, where it's like, do I listen to pop music because I'm sad, or am I sad because I listen to pop music?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think about that a lot.
Yeah.
And so,
I do the same thing.
When your record came out, it was a huge thing for me, because I can't think of another record at the time that was really focused on your relationship with your father and just kind of coping with the loss of him. And you know, especially prematurely. First off, like, thank you for that record.
Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to me.
But I know making that record and touring and playing these songs really had a physical, emotional toll on you, which I can only imagine. Like, whenever I speak about my father, I still get really choked up about certain things.
Yeah.
If you can talk about that whole wearing down and what it took for you to kind of get out of that. I know you mentioned Big Sur earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm out of it, and I don't know if I ever want to be out of it, to be honest with you. Maybe you can relate to that. But, you know, that making that record, I mean, I still kind of think it'll be the most important record I ever make I hope it's the most important record I ever make in my entire life. I don't really want to have to go through that again. But, yeah, you know, I'm lucky that it came out when it came out, at the very beginning of like where we're at now as a culture and consumption of music and art, because I think it would have been the end of me if I would be touring it now, because it was like kind of pre every friggin' person having their iPhone at a concert.
Right.
And I think if I would have been like playing those songs and like kind of destroying myself and feeling so sensitive and looking at it, people being buried in these devices, that it would have been like, what am I doing? And I certainly had this what am I doing moment many nights where I was really hurting doing this thing and being like, this is not worth it. But in retrospect, I think it was in a lot of ways, because I feel really great. And my relationship with my dad is pretty incredible now. And it's very easy for me to talk about it and to rationalize his death, and premature as it was and as brutal as it was on myself and my family and stuff. And miss the guy every day. But I'm like in a better place, because I think I traveled with that record and heard everybody's stories and realized that it's like being in a special club that you're in, where you all of a sudden have this like this perspective of the world and how short life is, that like really kind of informs the way you do everything. The way you love somebody, the way you make art, the way you eat, the way you walk with your dog, and the way you look at everything. And so that record informed everything about my life. It informed my move to the country from Toronto. It informs the way I live, the methodology of how I kind of try and move gently on this planet, and all of these things that, like, you know, when you sit down to write songs, you never think you're going to get this byproduct of like it being like a life makeover in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, it took physically, I know I lost a bunch of weight and I was pretty depressed, and I think it was depression anyways. It was definitely a pretty general unwellness that I was feeling. And it's taken me a long time to, the challenging thing is like you make something that's that important to you. It's like, how do you ever follow it up? And so making that last Evening Hymns record, it was kind of like, well, none of this doesn't feel as important to me as these songs about my dad, even though the songs about my dad on that record really do. Mm-hmm. The things that weren't were just felt kind of frivolous. It's like, well, what's a breakup song, or like, what's a living in the country self-reflecting song when you're not like dealing with these like super heady kind of moments of like death and mortality. What does it mean? And all that kind of stuff. They're all interconnected 100%. And I learned that, and it took me a while, but at the time I was like, and then touring kind of in this world where like, record sales were dropping and streaming was going up and Instagram was taking over, and just kind of being like, this just doesn't really feel that special anymore in a lot of ways, And so, yeah, I mean, that's the struggle now. This project's really awesome because my ego's less attached to it, because we're just driving around talking about ego all day long here, because it all kind of comes back to that and capitalism, those are the two things that kind of will crush us, mm-hmm. or are crushing us. But it's like thinking about like, performing the stuff every night. We're like, okay guys, the only thing that matters is that on stage, the four of us are just like really in the zone and having fun together, because the byproduct of that we know is really great, and because we've done it enough and we've recorded it and it makes sense. I mean, it's great in the sense that like me as an audience member would love it. So, and that's all that matters to me in a selfish way. So, like thinking about that and going on there and just doing that, and every night it's like, did we do it? And it's like, yeah, did we do it? Almost. It's like, okay, cool. How do we change that? And with Evening Hymns, it's definitely a more challenging project, because it's got a history and there's a context, and there's, the history in a lot of ways kind of haunts me, because I don't want to keep playing those songs from Spectral Dusk. And because it's difficult, mm-hmm. and I don't need to keep bringing myself through that. But a lot of people want to hear it, because that's why people cared about Evening Hymns, was because they had profound experiences with that record. And I love that, and I'm so grateful for it. But it's like, how do you move forward from that, Mm-hmm. And I still for me to go back and I almost always play Spectral Dusk still during any Evening Hymns set, because it's like this way to go back and visit my dad. It's like being able to go see him, because I go there and I can't not go into that thing and get really emotional and have this heavy moment. It's really profound for me, and I never want to overdo that and lose it. And it's challenging to go there, but there's something that's like so like, life affirming to like go and be like, holy shit, I feel like this is insane that I'm playing a song and it's making me feel overwhelmed. Like, it's amazing that music can do that, Mm-hmm. So it's nice to go and see him and think about all the imagery that I write about in that song. I can see my dad sitting up at the lake, smoking his pipe, and, on Mazenod, and like all of these moments, and thinking about, what it means to raise a family and all of this stuff. And it makes me, gives me goosebumps, because I remember exactly where I was when I wrote that stuff, and how tuned in I was to where I was at that time. So,
can you talk a little bit about your trip to Big Sur and Joshua Tree?
Mm-hmm, I'd love. Yeah, so Joshua Tree, I just got back from Big Sur in January, because I'm making it. The next ambient record is a record that I made in Big Sur with Edwin. So that place is incredible. I'm not sure if you've been there, but it's like,
I've always wanted to go.
Oh, you got to go. It's really incredible. So. Yeah, when we were making Quiet Energies, I was out there just kind of being like, what is this record? I've got all these songs that are written, the lyrics are feeling like, some of them I'm connecting with stuff. And I was just like, did a drive out to Joshua Tree and had this like kind of moment of coming back into LA with the windows down, listening to stuff and being like, oh, this is what this record is. It's like a rockin' record. It's like, don't try and be something that you're not, It's like, it's like this like super kind of fun rockin' thing. And like, I mean, there's a lot of like heavy moments on that record, but for the most part, it was like this like very like, it was just supposed to be a little bit more fun, and I realized that when I was out there. And I mean, I also like went up to Big Sur after I was in Joshua Tree, feeling like I'd kind of unlocked the record, and went and slept in my car and went to Esalen to like the Naked Night Baths at like 1 a.m. and saw like huge shooting stars falling over top of the Pacific Ocean, and I was like, oh, life, it's amazing, So yeah, I mean, I'm just always kind of looking for that. I always have my antenna up for that kind of stuff, that like those magical moments, trying to put myself in a position where I can experience like something that's like a holy shit moment or something. Mm-hmm. So that one kind of helped the lyrics for Quiet Energies. And I'm going to Big Sur again in like a week and a half, and I'm taking all of my unfinished lyrics up there to hopefully tie in the rest of this new Evening Hymns record, because I've got songs that are complete but that need lyrics. So it's a good place. It's just like, I mean, it's just like makes you feel pretty small there, which is kind of a cool place to write from, because it's like just so profoundly beautiful, and like it's just overwhelming and like kind of mind crushing. So
you moved away from the city a few years ago. just outside of Kingston. How has that sort of affected and shaped your songwriting process and recording?
Well, I have my own studio now. So yeah, I live north of this little village called Mountain Grove, which is about an hour north of Kingston. And it's like only house on a dead-end road, surrounded by 300 acres, and I have a recording studio there. I'm actually building a second recording studio, and the old studio is becoming sleeping accommodations because I'm producing a lot of bands up there now, and they come up and stay in the country. And I built a wood-burning sauna, and it's just like a more meditative life. I lived in Parkdale, and it was great, and I miss being able to go to Mother India for Malai Kofta roti. But other than that, it's like, I'm back. I grew up in the country, and it feels so good to be back. Like, It's just so quiet. The whole band slept there last night, and it was just like, the peepers are going crazy right now, and it's like, it's my favorite place in the whole world. So I have that and like 24-hour access to a recording studio. So I'm just like making a ton of stuff. And
who are some of the bands that you're working with?
Okay, well, let's just see. I just produced this guy from out west called Dylan Perkins. I produced the last Giant Hand record, helped on the last Acorn record. I'm working on a record by Kaylee Staples, who's a really great Toronto artist. What else have I done in there? A bunch of my partner's band, Boyhood. She has a record coming out in the end of June that I mixed and recorded a bunch of stuff on. She did most of the recording. It's booked. There's a lot of bands that are in there working on their own. There's a lot of stuff that I'm producing there. Leanne Simpson's last record, and yeah, so just like super, it's busy. It's great. I'm trying to think of stuff I have that's coming up. The Evening Hymns record. Yeah. So engineering and producing a bunch of stuff there. And that's really awesome because I'm like, just like making stuff. I'm working on other people's things, which is informing my own songwriting and whatnot. So yeah.
Awesome. So that's almost the end of the show for us. But before we say goodbye, in keeping with the whole ambient music thing, can you name your top 5 records?
Top 5 ambient records?
Ambient records.
Oh, holy smokes. Okay. Max Richter's The Blue Notebooks would be, that's a huge one for me. I bought that record when it came out and still stands up big time. Alluvium, Talk Amongst the Trees, I really like. William Basinski's Disintegration Loops. Harold Budd's Perhaps, and Sean McCann's 10 Impressions for Strings and Piano. Those are huge records in our house. Also they're the new Vanessa Amara record's amazing. What else? All the Editions Migo releases, all the GRM releases. Jim O'Rourke's I'm Happy and I'm Singing, and a 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just giving you so many records here. Finesse, Venice. That's a top, probably a top 5 for me as well. I could go on. I've been listening to stuff for a long time, and it's like, I definitely get like, I can really nerd out on it. It's pretty fun. So,
I'm surprised no Eno records.
I love Eno's Apollo. That record is huge. Actually, we played in Barcelona like last year, and he had done an installation in the Barcelona airport in the Departures Lounge where it was like a new music for airports kind of repurposed for the lounge, and it was just amazing to be like pushing our luggage carts and instruments like through the departure zone, and we kind of like just took our time going all over the place because like the speaker array would kind of change. You'd hear little kind of things. Yeah, I'm a huge Gavin Bryars fan. Sinking the Titanic, that's a massive piece for me. Yeah, we're gonna be playing a bunch of that stuff tonight in between sets too. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're looking forward to the show, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, man. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Season 2, Episode 6 of This Broken Mixtape featuring singer-songwriter Jonas Bonnetta. Visit thisbrokenmixtape.com to check out this episode's Spotify playlist. There you'll also find our past interviews and custom illustrations for each show. However you're tuning in today, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and share our podcast so we can find more listeners. That would really help us out a lot. If you have any comments, feedback, or ideas for guests, feel free to drop us a line through our website, Instagram, or Twitter. Join us next week where our special guest is owner of Off the Cuff Menswear, Lee Romberg. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate it. Cheers.